The year is 1326 BC, and the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten has just died. His successor Smenkhare, also known as Tutankhamun, is only 9 years old. To rule Egypt in his place, he has a regent, a chief official called I. I is an ambitious man who wants more than anything else to get the throne for himself. He wastes no time and marries the young king's sister and widow, Ankhesenamun, making him the new pharaoh. But he still has a problem. How do you legitimize your new position? Well, it helps if you have a god on your side. So I turns to the one god of Egypt, Aten, and claims that the sun god has given him the right to marry the royal widow. In this way, Aten gives him the divine right to rule as pharaoh. And so at age 45, I becomes the new ruler of Egypt. His reign is not without problems. There are revolts in Nubia and the Levant. There are also economic issues and food shortages. But these issues do not occupy too much of A's time, because he spends most of his days building monuments to Aten and having statues made of himself. He builds a temple at Karnak and begins to depict himself as a god. This does not go unnoticed by Horemheb, general of the Egyptian army and another man with eyes on the throne. He takes offense to I's claim of divinity and waits for his chance to strike. It comes when I dies. Horemheb marches on Thebes with his army, forces I's widow to divorce the dead pharaoh, and then marries her himself. In doing so, he gets the divine right to rule over Egypt. But before we continue, make sure to follow for more videos about ancient Egypt. The story of I, while fascinating, is little known. The same cannot be said about his predecessor, the famous boy king Tutankhamun. We know much more about his childhood than any other ancient Egyptian. We know that he was born in the royal palace in Thebes. We know that he became pharaoh at age 9 after his father, Akhenaten, died. And we know how he died, probably from malaria, at the age of 18. But many questions about his life remain unanswered. Who were his parents? What happened in his childhood? Why did he die so young? And what happened after his death? What makes Tutankhamun's case so unique is that we have his actual tomb. While most Egyptian tombs were robbed in antiquity, his was discovered intact in the Valley of the Kings in 1922 by Howard Carter. It has provided us with countless artifacts from the funerary mask to chariots, and even his famous golden burial mask. Yet the inscriptions on the walls of the tomb provide few answers. They tell us about his coronation and his victories. They show him hunting and offer prayers to various gods, but they do not reveal anything about his parents. In fact, the name of his mother is erased in almost all the records, including her own tomb. This was done by Akhenaten after he came to power. He wanted to erase the memory of his wife, who had been his half-sister, and replace it with his new wife, Nefertiti. We now know that Nefertiti had 2 daughters with Akhenaten, but no son. When the boy king died, there was no heir to the throne. So who took the throne after him? This is where our story returns to the enigmatic I. He ruled Egypt for only 4 years, yet he built enough monuments for himself to outlive Tutankhamun in fame. He is buried next to the boy king, but his tomb was not discovered until 1931. Unlike Tutankhamun's tomb, it was completely empty. All that remained was a small collection of funerary furniture in a side room. Nevertheless, his rise to power remains a fascinating episode in Egyptian history. Yet the story of A would have remained unknown had it not been for a series of fortunate events. First, we need to go back to the reign of Tutankhamun. As we said, the boy king died at the age of 18, leaving no heir behind. His death caused a crisis in the Egyptian royal family. Many advisors and officials competed for the throne, but none could claim a closer relationship to the deceased king than the old royal scribe, I. Remember, he was married to Tutankhamun's sister, and now he was also married to his widow. Through these ties, he had access to the king's court and the royal treasury. All that he needed was the support of the military, and this proved to be a minor obstacle. General Horemheb was the most powerful man in Egypt at the time. He commanded the army and the navy, and he was also married to the king's half-sister. But he was old and nearing the end of his career, so he chose to retire and pass on his influence to Ai, paving the way for his accession to the throne. With the support of the military, Ai had become the most powerful man in Egypt. All that he needed was the approval of the priesthood. This was also easily obtained. The priests loved Akhenaten. He had elevated their status and granted them many privileges, and Ai was more than happy to perpetuate Akhenaten's religious policies. In fact, the priests were so fond of Ai that they treated him as a member of the royal family. His name was written in the same cartouches as the pharaohs, and his statues were placed in the most important temples in Egypt. However, the people of Egypt had no say in the selection of their new pharaoh. The accession to the throne was purely a matter of political maneuvering, and those who could have opposed it, like General Horemheb, chose not to. So Ai ascended to the throne with virtually no opposition. As we mentioned earlier, he wasted no time in consolidating his power. He married the royal widow, changed his name to a more regal form, built monuments to Aten, and began to style himself as a god. His coins and statues depicted him wearing the traditional pharaonic kilt and the Atef crown, symbols of divine kingship. These symbols had been used by previous pharaohs, but never before by a subject. Ai was the first to use them in this way. While there is little evidence of opposition during Ai's reign, his successors faced more trouble. His widow, Ankhesenamun, played an important role in his rise to power. She was only 15 years old when she married Ai, and she had recently given birth to a stillborn child. Her husband's accession to the throne elevated her to the position of Great of Praises, a prestigious title reserved for senior members of the royal family. According to tradition, the royal widow could not marry anyone other than a close relative, which is why Ai chose to wed the king's sister. After Tutankhamun's death, the priests of Amun tried to force Ankhesenamun to marry a member of the royal family, presumably a cousin. But she defied them and married Ai instead. This act of defiance may have contributed to the later demise of the priesthood of Amun. Ankhesenamun lived until the reign of Ramesses II, and she held considerable power throughout. But what kind of person was she? Was she a scheming and ambitious woman who sought power for herself and her family, or was she simply a victim of circumstance? Unfortunately, we don't have enough evidence to answer this question. The only inscription mentioning her by name is an ostracon found in the palace at Thebes. It is a love poem addressed to the royal wife, and it paints a picture of a tender and affectionate woman. The author misses her beauty and asks her to return his love. Such poetry would not be appropriate if Ankhesenamun were a cold and calculating ruler. So perhaps she was neither. Perhaps she was just a teenage girl who fell in love with an older man. Ai ruled for only 4 years, but in that short time he managed to build a considerable number of monuments. He built a temple at Karnak, erected a huge statue of himself in the temple of Ra, and founded a city which he named Ayat. Several towns and villages throughout Egypt also bear his name. It seems that he wanted to erase Tutankhamun from memory and replace him with himself, but the boy king's legacy lives on. While Ai is remembered today for marrying the royal widow and usurping the throne, Tutankhamun is remembered for his fascinating life and mysterious death. Thank you for watching.